I've really been wanting to talk to Julie K. Brown for a while because her work has been so extraordinary, so admirable. She's teaming up with our friend Adam McKay. She's a Miami Herald investigative reporter. And I think this Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story, the authorship of it, I think she's contributing to a project that Adam McKay is working on that we will talk to you about in a second. But basically, I don't have this wrong, right, Julie? And thank you for joining us. Jeffrey Epstein, these things came to light because you were dogged about your reporting, correct? It doesn't come to light if you don't chase this story through the labyrinth of fame and obstacles that you had to chase it through, and power.
Yes, and I would also like to add, though, very importantly, that a lot of people don't mention is it also wouldn't have happened without the fact that these victims were brave enough to talk to me. That was really the change in this story, the pivotal point, I think, because as you know, this story had been out there for a long time. It's just that the voices of the victims were never told. And the fact that, a handful of them shared their stories with me took a lot of courage. So I always like to mention them.
Of course, because every time we've talked to someone who navigates this labyrinth, Julie, it'll swallow your life. And they always go to the place of, no, I'm a warrior on behalf of people with real courage because this needs to stop. And so you did such groundbreaking, solid journalism through the corridors of power, but you were doing it because you were respecting their bravery, right? They're coming to you with such a difficult story that will change their lives forever. So of course it changed yours too, right?
I don't think anybody realized when we started this project, especially not myself and the victims, this would happen the way it did. As soon as this story went, exploded, the first people I called were the victims because I knew that the media was going to start immediately banging on their doors. So that I knew their lives were going to change at that point. But when we started this project, we certainly didn't realize what was going to happen.
And when did you realize, okay, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought to get all of this published? And where along the paths was your stamina for it tested?
Well, I thought that this was going to be a simple story in the beginning. When you do a story like this, what you usually do is you look at the lawsuits, you call a couple of lawyers, you get, the summary motion for summary judgment, and you're done, and you write a story. In this story, it was very clear pretty early on that this was a bigger monster than anybody ever could really wrap their hands around because there was so much information. There were so many lawyers, there were so many lawsuits, there were so many victims, and there were so many people who wanted to stand in the way of getting the real story out. So we had to jump through so many obstacles in order to get this story. I can't even begin to count, and I want to mention Emily Michaud, my videographer, photographer, was my partner in this project. And she was, just as important, if not almost more important than myself, because she made the documentaries that went with this project.
What would you regard as the most formidable of the obstacles? Power, money, or more specifically?
I think just kind of rocking the boat, with so many people who were sort of in the same position, who felt that, number one, that I wasn't doing anything extraordinary at all. So I had to face haters who were saying this wasn't a story at all. So in order to do it, I had to convince them this is a story. So that was, that was trying at points. And then after the story broke, people who still thought, well, this is a great story, but it's over now. And then when he was finally arrested, all of a sudden everybody realized, well, wait a minute, this is more than I thought. It's just every step of the way having to prove ourselves, I guess, to prove that this was such a miscarriage of justice. And even to some degree, even that lasts until today, that there are people that do not understand this story and how traumatic and how betrayed, how our criminal justice system betrayed these victims.
For the ignorant, Julie, can you tell the people the starting point? And I know they're interested in this story, and I don't know if they know the entire backstory. But basically, the miscarriage of justice that you first noticed was the idea of somebody with a lot of money was getting away, and a lot of power and a lot of political power was getting away with this in plain sight in a way that was appalling, the way the legal system handled it.
Right. I wanted to do something. I had been doing a lot of stories on our prison system, our wonderful prison system here in Florida, which is one of the most inhumane systems in America. And I sort of wanted to take a break. I'd been working on it for a while. And I knew from interviewing female inmates in our prisons that sex trafficking was a huge problem. And every time I started research on sex trafficking, I ran into Jeffrey Epstein's name. And really, one of the things that sparked it was we had a columnist at the time at the paper, Fred Grimm, who had written a couple of columns about him and how he had gotten away with this. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, I can't believe that this happened. How does this happen? And I started, getting records and started to look into it. And right around that time, Donald Trump nominated Alex Acosta to be labor secretary. Now, Alex Acosta was the prosecutor who essentially signed off on a sweetheart deal for this multimillionaire financier who lived in Palm Beach in New York and a number of other places, who had essentially run a sexual pyramid scheme out of his mansion in Palm Beach involving hundreds of high school and middle school girls. And for that crime, he got a special plea deal that basically amounted to the fact that he got nothing. He spent a little bit of time in so-called jail, but he was allowed to leave every day. He got a work release program. So he essentially got away with this crime. And I thought at the time that I recognized that the victims had never been interviewed. And I thought, I'm just going to call them and get a reaction to them about the fact that this former prosecutor who had essentially let their predator off the hook is now labor secretary, which is, by the way, one of the largest agencies that we have in America with oversight of child labor laws and human trafficking. And now the guy that let this trafficker essentially off the hook is now really running the labor department. So I started from that point thinking I would just get a couple of, the reactions from the victims, but it turned out that since the victims were underage, none of their names were known. So I had to start finding them. And, that was a daunting task because, as I said, nobody really knew their names. So I had to try to figure out who they were.
Can you explain to me how exhaustive a project this was? How much vetting is required? How much threat you come under when people with money are trying to make your stuff, money and power, trying to make your stuff go away?
Well, I have been doing this for a very long time. I think everything in my career that I've done, I think prepared me for this story. So I was very prepared to do battle. I knew that, we had some powerful lawyers attached to this. Jeffrey Epstein had, Alan Dershowitz, Kenneth Starr, Jay Lefkowitz, a number of really tough lawyers. And even civil lawyers that really went after these girls at the time that this happened, and that there were some civil suits. So I knew that this was going to be a formidable project. So I sort of started at the beginning armed, well armed with information. There's no way you could do a story like this without having all your T's crossed and all your I's dotted and knowing where you got every single piece of information. So from the outset, I was really careful. I called our lawyers. I told them what I was doing. They gave me some advice on how to handle information, how to, you got to even be careful on how you phrase your emails to some of these people. So I was pretty prepared, fortunately, when things started getting tough and there were certain lawyers that were starting to threaten us and hiring libel lawyers and things of that sort. I felt pretty confident because I knew that everything that I had done was really carefully researched.
Anything that wasn't? Anything that you weren't prepared for?
To be honest with you, the thing I wasn't prepared for the most was how the media, some members of the media reacted. They, um, there was a lot of people, of course, who applauded my work, but there were some people that felt that what I did wasn't anything extraordinary at all, and in some ways tried to almost sabotage it. So I wasn't prepared for that. I was a little surprised by that part of it. Alan Dershowitz, as everyone knows, is pretty much of a bulldog and a bully. And he tried very, very, very hard to intimidate me. In fact, when we had an interview with him, it was the first time in my career I ever brought my editor with me for my interview with him, because I knew that or I suspected that he would twist everything. So I wanted to make sure I had a witness.
What was that like in terms of a challenge? Because I don't know what's true and what's not. And I imagine wherever you're interviewed, you're asked for the details about, was Clinton on the plane, or was Dershowitz involved, or wherever the gossipy things are that you're too responsible a reporter to just say without a lot of vetting. But the idea that Dershowitz was in the middle of this is crazy to me. Just all of it, that I still see him on television when he was this close to some of the foulest of the things that seem to be around this case.
Yeah, and keep in mind, he's suing almost everybody involved. He's suing Netflix. He's suing one of the victims. He's suing the victim's lawyer. I'm trying to think of all the different things he's suing. I mean, he's suing everybody, and he certainly, tried to sue us. I think he wanted to set me up to be sued a couple of times, but I was just, I knew what he was doing. I could see the tea leaves, and we had some very good lawyers at the Herald who were really supportive, and editors who were very supportive of my work. So it didn't work with us for whatever reason. I guess we were just really, we weren't going to back down. There were things he demanded of us that we didn't do. We just said, no, we're not going to do that.
Do I have this wrong? Because I don't know the backstory here, Julie, but I imagine Adam McKay cares a lot. He's got a lot of power right now. He cares a lot about protecting journalism, and it is harder and harder for newspapers, a thing you care about, to fight some of these fights as the money and power gets lopsided. So I am glad that you are armed in this series with what it is that you're doing. Can you explain to us what it is that you're doing with this? Because your work has been thorough, exhaustive, and hugely important. And I know people want the gossipy details, because what did this all happen? How did this Maxwell woman, how did all of this happen? And did Jeffrey Epstein kill himself in jail, or are there other informational tidbits here? I'm interested in all those things. I don't know how much you can speak to any of those things, but the work itself, what are you trying to accomplish with what you're doing here with McKay?
Well, I've written this book, Perversion of Justice, which was an expansion of my series that appeared in the Herald that started all this. And the book, when you do an investigation, you can't put everything in the paper. You just don't have the space. So the book had a lot of detail in there that I could never have put into the series, including some of the more salacious aspects of the case involving Clinton, involving Trump, involving Maxwell, involving Prince Andrew. But the reality is this case happened a very long time ago. And, we're talking 15 to 20 years right now. And memories fade. People don't, keep, even the so-called video that they suspect that Epstein kept. Keep in mind the technology of those kinds of videos back 20 years ago wasn't exactly what it is today. So we don't really know if there's any real evidence out there about what these other third parties, as prosecutors like to call them, meaning people like Les Wexner, the billionaire who was very friendly, people like Jess Staley, the banker in London, who was now stepped down from his position because of some emails that they found between him and Epstein. I mean, the list goes on and on. Just because you're friends with Epstein and Maxwell doesn't mean that you committed a crime. And proving that they had committed a crime, if they did, is very difficult to do, as we just saw from the Maxwell trial, which was a challenge for prosecutors because this evidence no longer exists really, and people's memories fade. So it's going to be very hard, I think, to really confirm, whether some of these other big names were involved.
As a reporter, what were the most invigorating things that you learned? When I say invigorating, I mean you are chasing a cause. You're changing your life. So when you can get corroboration on pinned down things, when power and money is trying to keep it away from you, you can actually execute the activism that you will find in these pieces. So where along, because this is years, you've given years of your life over this. This never becomes, for any of the authors or any of the activists who are doing real and good and thorough journalism, anything other than hugely life-changing, because now you're living with all of these stories, Julie. Anybody who stops you, wants to talk to you about this, you are the person who was identified with this thing that has made you journalistically famous, and you're still advocating. So where along the path were the breakthroughs?
Well, the biggest breakthrough was when we had the first interview with the victim, which was Michelle Licata. And I still get a little emotional thinking about that interview because that's when we really knew we had a huge story. Her story was incredible. And what we learned about how she was treated and how it affected her life was, I'm still, as I'm thinking about it, still getting emotional. For her to share that story, which was extremely painful, was brave. And for us, it was very delicate because, I did some research myself on how to interview victims of trauma because I didn't want to re-traumatize them. So it was a very delicate process, convincing her to go public, to go on camera. This wasn't just me taking notes. She went on camera. And, that is very different. And it was raw. That's what I tell people about Emily's videos and her documentaries. No one will ever get that kind of video from this story ever again, because these were the first people who really told their stories. And it was really chilling, how he masterminded this and how he just, he just, knew the vulnerable points about these girls. It's very scary, especially if you have girls yourself. And you think about some man who is very charming, has lots of money, promises this girl that he's going to get her into fashion, really does know the owner of Victoria's Secret, and promises her the world and sort of grooms her into believing that he's going to change her life. And that's essentially what he did with many of these girls.
Julie, you've been covering the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Is there anything you can tell us about your takeaways from that, from being in that courtroom every day?
Well, it was kind of, I think that the prosecutors did the best job that they could. But I also think that they really went to great lengths to keep a lid on some of the, to not protect, but to not let it get into, I guess, in their minds, probably a circus, if they would have raised some of these prominent men who were involved in this. They never called Virginia Jeffery, who is one of the main accusers, victims, who of course is accused Alan Dershowitz of sexual abuse, and a number of other prominent men. And, why wouldn't you call her? Her name came up constantly during testimony, but they never called her. And so the thinking is that they didn't want to go there. They didn't want this trial to go off the rails into the Lolita Express. They wanted to keep it very tightly focused on Maxwell and what she did. And, you know, as I said, as I, you know, attended it every day, if they win the case, then everybody will say this was a brilliant strategy. If they lose the case, then everybody's going to say, what the hell did they do? And in this case, they did win it. So you have to say that the strategy that they had worked.
Can you tell us? I've got a million questions, Julie, and I appreciate your time with this. People should check out both the book, The Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story, and the work that she's doing around this, because it deserves to have a lot of power behind it, because she is very thorough about what she's doing. This is not, to me, it's important in the media age, as you can't tell what's true and what's not. What she's reporting on this stuff is really vigorously vetted. So what can you tell us, Julie, not irresponsibly, factually, about what surrounds Alan Dershowitz as he sues everybody from the center of accusations that have been levied at him about being involved in some of what was happening with Epstein?
Well, you know, like I said, I've been doing this a very long time. And from my experience, the people that threaten and scream and essentially bully the loudest are the people that have something to hide. I'm not saying he's guilty of a crime or of assaulting anyone, but he knows. I mean, he was close enough to Epstein and Maxwell to know what was going on. And, you know, of course, he's a lawyer and he's going to claim that he has that privilege. But, you know, if he wanted to, he could help prosecutors go after some of the other people, especially if he's innocent as he claims to be. And I'm not hearing that that has really happened, that he's led people to understand even exactly what was going on here.
Do you feel, and this is not easily reported, obviously, but do you feel like you could add facts to the suspicious stuff that happened around Epstein's death in jail?
I don't think anybody really has gotten to the heart, and I certainly haven't. I say in my book that I don't think that he committed suicide, at least not by himself. I believe that if anything, it was perhaps an assisted suicide, but I don't believe that he did it on his own. There's too many problems with the whole story. You know, his cellmate was taken out, you know, hours before this happened. He had just gotten off a suicide watch, which to me means he should have been really watched closely. He had wires from a sleep apnea machine in his cell. He supposedly did this by tying to the top bump and jumping and pulling his own neck. I don't think he probably had the strength to break 3 bones in his neck that way. All the toiletries from his top bunk were undisturbed. So you're pulling on your top bunk to hang yourself, and all the toiletries on the top of that bunk stay undisturbed. How does that happen? I mean, there's just too many. You know, and then you have the guards. They were asleep at the wheel, and there's no real. The video in the hall doesn't show anybody really coming in and out. But you know, I know from covering prison corruption that those cameras all the time are manipulated. And so I just think that there was more to it. Do I think he was murdered? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say that, but there's just it's all wrong. It's just all wrong. And the fact that the medical examiner hasn't even released the report, I think, is also telling.
It's enormously suspicious, right? All of it. Like, you can't come out and just say, hey, someone killed him because someone powerful killed him because they have secrets, but there's enough suspicious here that it's impossible to refute that possibility as well, right?
That's right. And I have, as I mentioned, I've covered prison deaths more times than I wish I had. And I know the way it works in prison. It's scary how easy it is to murder someone in prison. It's really scary. All you have to do is bribe one of these killers who are in there for life and doesn't have anything to lose, and you know, bribe them with, you know, cigarettes, a carton of cigarettes, or you know, money or whatever. I mean, it is scary how easy it is if you really want to kill somebody in prison. So I'm not saying that's what happened here. I don't have enough information to say that. But I just don't think he did this by his own hand.
Is it easy in any way to correct the bureaucracy enough so that an important, famous witness that needs to be kept alive, to see if you could get to more in power to stop this thing, that we could also believe that it's pretty easy for a government to keep safe someone that needs to be kept safe if we really need to care about this issue?
Well, I think, first of all, he is dead. I'm sure of that. But I absolutely think that there should be a better investigation. I don't think the Justice Department, for example, should be only in charge of this, because it's the Justice Department that screwed this up. They were, oversight over the Bureau of Prisons. So I think that there probably needs to be some kind of a, similar to other famous deaths, there's probably should be a commission of some sort that really looks at everything that happened in this particular case.
As a human being, Julie, never mind, because you try to be impartial. You're reporting factually, but you're also doing activism with factual work. It's very hard to do what you're doing against power and money. Along this path, if you could give us the emotion, not the objective journalist, the parts of this that you found most appalling beyond the two affronts, right? The abuse starting point, and then the system that protects the rich and wealthy. Beyond the two obvious ones, what were some of the places, the justice system failures beyond that, where you were just simply most appalled, where you had that question again and again? How was this allowed to happen? How can this be so and not be out in the light?
Well, I think one of the biggest mysteries of this is how Jeffrey Epstein got work release in Palm Beach. I mean, how does a man who they all knew that he was preying on little girls, able to just, if it was any other plumber from, Hialeah, the guy would never be able to get work release and get a valet to pick him up every day at his jail, early in the morning, take him to this luxurious office in downtown Palm Beach where, he gets caterers to bring him in food, where he gets visitors, and apparently some of them were women that he screwed around with behind closed doors. I mean, who gets that kind of treatment except for someone who not only has money, but has people in his pocket? I mean, that's what's really, I think, the WTF, what the fuck? How does a guy get away with that? And why aren't more people trying to find out how that happened? I know that there was a state FDLE investigation into it. I looked at it. I don't think it went far enough. I don't think it asked the right people. For example, the investigators never even questioned any of Jeffrey Epstein's cellmates when he was in that jail. He had cellmates in there. I know because there were certain guards that I talked to that told me stories about the treatment that he got. For FDLE not to even interview his cellmates shows me that they were just, kind of going through the motions of an investigation.
Julie, your reporting on this has been extraordinary. Thank you. I'd like to catch up with you again at some point, because it's important that people hear the parts of this that you have had a unique access to inside of the machine. I salute your work. I know a lot of people, I mean, obviously you've won the biggest prizes, but what you've done here is an extraordinary use of your tools. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Dan.